Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a fight between two rivals, between two prime lenses. In this corner, we have the reigning champion, the Nikon 50mm f1.8 lens. And in this corner, in the Chinese food box, we have the challenger, the Nikon 35mm f1.8 lens. This is going to be an interesting fight, folks. Round one. The 50mm is an FX lens and the 35mm is a DX lens. The 50mm, when you put it on a full frame camera like the D3, would utilize the full sensor and it would give you a 50mm field of view. If you put this lens on a cropped sensor camera like my D300S, you wouldn't get the full 50mm field of view, you would get closer to 75mm. Which is a smaller field of view, but it does make the 50mm on my D300S a nice portrait solution. On to the 35mm. It is, like I said, a DX lens, so it is made for use with crop sensor DSLRs. On one of these crop sensor cameras, it will give you a similar field of view as the 50mm would on a full frame camera. You can also use a 35mm on a full frame Nikon DSLR though. It would give you the full 35mm frame of view, but you would not be able to utilize the full sensor of the full frame camera. The Nikon DSLRs will automatically switch to a cropped sensor mode. So, who wins this round? I'm going to have to go with a 35mm because the big benefit of having an FX lens is using it on a full frame camera. And I just don't have one right now. So I like being able to use the 35mm on my crop sensor camera and not having to back way out to take a group shot. It's also the closest to my natural field of view, which I like. So, 1 point for 35mm. Round two. The 35mm is an AFS lens, which means that it has an internal focusing motor, which is super quiet, by the way. You can use it on all of the Nikon DSLRs, and all of the focusing happens inside this casing. Though there is a focusing ring here that you can use if you want. It just doesn't move when you are autofocusing. It's so sleek, like, I don't know, it's like the Batmobile of lenses. However, the 50, it is not an AFS lens, so it relies on the camera's focusing motor. And Nikon's compact series of DSLRs, like the D40, the D40X, the D60, and the D3000 and D3100, they don't have an in-camera focusing motor, so the 50mm won't autofocus with those cameras. You can still use the lens, but you have to manually focus it with the focusing ring that you can see is all exposed. Not only am I not interested in manually focusing each shot, I also like to be as quiet as a mouse when I am shooting. So I have to say, this round's going to have to go to the 35mm. Another point for 35mm. Now, both of these are prime lenses that can produce crystal clear images. People will talk for decades about the sharpness at various apertures, how one is better than the other at this aperture or that aperture. However, I have had very good success with both of these lenses in terms of clear images. They are both very sharp at around f8, which is a sweet spot for many lenses. They do both get a little softer as you approach f1.8, but they still look great. You are, of course, significantly reducing your depth of field when you approach the wider apertures. For example, at 5 feet and at f1.8 on the 35mm lens, your depth of field is about 8.5 inches. So, who wins on sharpness? We have a tie on this round, so 1 point for each. Yay! Last but not least, we have to talk about cost. Cost always plays a factor when I'm making a purchase. The 50mm will run you about $130, and the 35mm is a little bit more expensive and will run you about $200. Well, they're both pretty inexpensive as lenses go. So I'm actually going to have to call this round a tie too. So that means another point for each of them. I love giving points. Well, it appears that today the challenger wins. If I had to choose one of these lenses to purchase today, the 35mm f1.8 lens would win out over the 50mm f1.8 lens. Now, I didn't get too technical on our fight today. There are websites that are dedicated to getting down to the nitty-gritty specifics of each lens. But I'm just too practical for that. I don't always care about things like the exact field of view I'm seeing with each camera or exactly how much the lens weighs. I know what I know. 35mm is prime, it's clear, it's great in low light, it's quiet, it's light as a feather, it is inexpensive, and it's easy to use. I did, however, set my D300S on a tripod and take a photo of Veronica with the 35mm and then with the 50mm so that you can see the difference in the angle of view between the two cameras. Those are posted on snapcheck.com. That's all today. Let me know if you have any questions.